Hello, and welcome to the second of the videos looking at collaborative strategy, looking at alliances and how we take a strategic review of how firms work together to gain competitive advantage. Now, in the last video, we saw how strategic alliances could be of many types, each a mixture of the governance mechanisms involved in holding those partnerships together. A mixture of equity holdings in each other or in a joint venture vehicle, explicit contracts and non-equity links, mutual understanding, and the relationship between the firms and individuals within the firms. The aim being to reduce those transaction costs that are associated with simply buying in products and services from the market, while at the same time reduce some of the ownership costs involved in having activities inside the hierarchy. We also saw in the last video that strategic alliances were becoming more and more popular. In today's world, it's increasingly attractive to work with others in such partnerships. Firms see it as a way to improve their current operations, improve the efficiency and effectiveness and therefore cut costs, to learn from those partners, so accumulating knowledge and know-how, and also to share risk or cut costs when entering into new businesses, into new markets. Increasingly, strategic alliances being seen as an attractive way to operate in today's market. In the last video, we also saw how different perspectives of strategy can bring different insights on a firm's existing and potential partnerships. Taking activity view as in Porter's thinking and in Blue Ocean strategy, so thinking about the system of activities and the position the alliance adopts in a market. Or taking a resource-based view and how firms can share and leverage the combined resource portfolio of both businesses. So the work on RBV and dynamic capabilities. As an example, look at the UK Post Office's collaboration with the retail chain WH Smith's. In that relationship, Smiths operate more than 240 post office branches in its high street stores in a franchise relationship, although originally some of those branches were directly operated by the post office. In that relationship, WH Smiths gets the post office brand, which attracts customers into its stores, and with that footfall to which it can sell its other products. Whilst from that relationship, the post office gets high street locations and means it can exit expensive, often historic buildings which are difficult to operate and costly to run. So both firms leveraging the resources that are owned by the other. WH Smith has similar relationships with Marks & Spencer's Foods and with Costa, the coffee chain. Whilst the post office has historically always operated sub-post offices as a franchise and agency operation. There are literally thousands of sub-post offices dotted around the UK, which are local stores using the post office services to build traffic into their shops. However, despite the obvious benefits of partnering, it is surprising how many alliances fail. Up to 70% do not meet the goals of their parent companies and fail to realise the benefits that was expected. Now, there are a variety of reasons for this, including the changing of conditions, whether in terms of the firms, in their diverging objectives and priorities, or in the environment changing. And with that change, an unwillingness of either partner or both to renegotiate the terms of that alliance. You often find conflict between a desire to collaborate and competition, or there's simply inability of partners to work well together. The alliance looks promising, but when it comes to making it happen, it just doesn't gel for a variety of reasons. This is not surprising. An alliance is still an exchange with all the challenges that that brings. Remember those drivers of transaction costs. And there's often commercial incentives to misappropriate value. This all implies that to gain the benefits of an alliance, that their management is crucial. And this links directly into the concept of dynamic capabilities. Remember, dynamic capabilities are the consistent and repeatable routines and processes that manage the portfolio of resources in an organisation. In this case, that portfolio of resources is across the two alliance partners. And as we saw in the study unit on dynamic capabilities, Thies and Pisano suggest there are three types of dynamic capabilities. Three areas where firms have to deliberately put in place processes and routines to effectively deploy and develop its resources and competencies. Learning routines, managing routines, and reconfiguring routines. Partnerships play across all three of these areas. You're looking to learn from a partner and how to operate in partnership. You're looking to robustly manage that sharing and deployment of resources. And often you're looking to alliances to bring new resources and competencies into your business. Now we can look at the dynamic capabilities at play in alliances at two levels. Firstly, we can look at the specific interaction between two parties and how you put in place and manage a specific alliance. Now the literature here breaks up the requirements in terms of three phases. A formation phase, when you're selecting a partner and initiating the alliance. A design phase, when you're deciding the type of alliance to put in place. And then a post-formation phase. How are you managing that alliance on an ongoing basis? Now, effective firms put in place formal criteria against which to judge which partners to work with. Now, according to Kale and Singh, those partners need to show three attributes. Firstly, in terms of the resources and competencies possessed, there needs to be a complementarity. There needs to be little, if any, overlap in the core competencies that are possessed by each player. So the combined portfolio dovetails well together. Secondly, there has to be compatibility between the two organisations. There's a fit in terms of the style of management, the goals of each organisation, and also the culture. So the firms are likely to be able to work well together and the alliance is likely to be sustained. And then finally, there needs to be commitment on both sides to the alliance. And with that commitment, a willingness to contribute resources to the alliance activities, and also along the way make short-term sacrifices for longer-term gains. Sacrifices to ensure that the alliance keeps working and so delivers its objectives over the longer term. Now, the levels of each of these will vary with context and the objectives of each organisation, but firms need to have clarity on what they're looking for in terms of each of these areas. Moving to the design phase, this links back to what we talked about in the last video. What is the mix of governance that is being applied into this alliance? Is there equity sharing across the two businesses, or in terms of setting up a jointly owned joint venture vehicle? How is relational governance, non-equity governance, going to work inside the organisation? And what legal contractual positions are needed in this alliance? Again, the approach chosen is going to be contingent on the expected risks, what timing considerations there are, how long the alliance is expected to last for, and what is the approach that is taken to negotiation. And those choices should not just be at the senior management level. They should be clear to everyone in the business who is connected with that alliance. And then finally, in terms of the post-formation phase, this is about making choices about the formal and informal approaches to the ongoing management of the alliance. What processes are put in place to coordinate activities? What structures are put in place in terms of joint venture boards, collaborative committees? What are the feedback processes? And how is conflict escalated and resolved? Also, explicit emphasis on how trust and relationships between the businesses are developed. Either partner making unilateral contributions without expectations from the other side, ensuring that promises are executed, and deliberately ensuring that individual relationships between managers and other staff develop and so create a strong bond between the organisation. These deliberate approaches to coordination and developing trust increases the willingness to share and reduces the risk of opportunism. And so best practice says that formal mechanisms need to be put in place in each of these areas to improve the chances of success. Although those mechanisms do need to be calibrated to the specific situation of that alliance. An example of a firm that does many alliances is Aviva, the UK insurance business. A major part of its business comes via partnerships with banks in a model that's called bank assurance. The bank brings the customers and Aviva provides the insurance expertise. So both parties seeking to exploit their competencies to each's benefit. Now something like 25% of Aviva's premiums come via bank assurance, and it has something like 100 bank assurance partners across the world, including 15 major joint ventures. Now Aviva, when looking at new partners and which countries to enter in, has very clear targeting criteria and standardized approaches to partnership and design, and then to ongoing management. Now I talked to David Angulo, who's now chairman of Dundas Capital and based in Madrid, but previously he was the bank insurance director for the Aviva Group, and prior to that for its European division. And I asked him about how Aviva managed its partnerships.
You know what is absolutely key in any kind of a strategic alliance is alignment of interests. Okay, this is the first thing that you have to work with your partner. Make sure that your targets are exactly the same as the targets of your partner. If something starts perfectly well with a perfect alignment of the strategic interests of both parties, at least the basis of it are very well settled down on the ground. And that will help you to keep growing and building up.
Yeah.
Then, once you have to think about what are you bringing to that alliance and what your partner is bringing to that alliance. And it has to be something absolutely complementary. Okay, so there mustn't be overlaps. If there are overlaps, you will find issues. So in the case I have my experience, my experience was based on insurance, but you can apply to whatever kind of business you would like, right? First of all is what are you putting on the table and what are they putting on the table, okay? So you have to put on the table and pull together the best of both organizations, right? So basically this was a melting pot culture that you had to put together in a pot, okay? And then start acting as just one organization, which was the most difficult thing, okay? First of all, the good faith of the relationship, okay? This is based on having crystal clear what were the target and objectives of that relationship. Then there is alignment of incentives to the network and how to sell insurance, because banks have always sold banking products, but it is an incredibly important exercise to teach them how to sell insurance, because it's a different sales process. Okay, and on that, I mean, it always took time in order to have a very, thorough learning process that has to be put it in the whole organization.
Yes.
And then last but not least, it was a very easy follow-up of the results and the campaigns and the marketing and everything, which would allow to make sure that all the points that were on the layers below were acting on the right direction. Many of the failures in bank assurance have happened just because they built just one layer of top executives who were discussing and talking about insurance and how to sell the best product for the clients. But that's a big mistake if you put it that alone. You have to build up exactly the same pyramid in the whole organization of the bank. So the way we were developing successful agreements were, first of all, having an executive committee with the top management of the bank and the top management of Aviva on bank insurance, on which we were discussing the big things. Then it was a second layer on where there was the middle management, on which these specialists that we had on bank assurance and Aviva were dealing on a daily basis with the top regional managers or middle management of the bank, working on the integration, because that's another very important thing. The process has to be seamless, has to be easy, has to be included as a part of the bank. And then, as I was telling you, was top management, middle management, but then there was, a branch management layer on which we had mobile teams of trainers and of insurance specialists who were teaching and supporting and inspiring and following up all the strategy that was written from top down.
Yeah.
Okay, so actually the only way you can do this thing perfectly successful is if you put in all the layers relationship with the bank. Otherwise, it will fail.
So as you see, deliberate routines around the formation phase, the design phase, and the post-formation phase. In addition to thinking about individual alliances, many organisations are involved in multiple partnerships. Thus, as well as thinking about individual partnerships, they also need to put in place a firm-level alliance capability. Now, such a capability can be the source of competitive advantage, as it's shown that through the development and institutionalisation of such a capability, the firm has far greater success with alliances and is more attractive as an alliance partner. Now, Kaylan Singh suggests there are a number of factors that lead to firms successfully developing an alliance capability. Now, it sounds obvious, but the first factor is greater alliance experiences. The more alliances a firm has put in place, the more it will have an alliance capability. Now, to ensure that happens, the firm needs to put in place routines that ensures feedback from those previous alliances is captured and informs the firm's other alliances. And this leads to the second factor. Second factor is the firm puts in place a dedicated alliance function. So a dedicated structure or entity that's responsible for coordinating and managing all of the firm's alliance activities. And then that unit acts as the focal point for feedback from all the alliances the organisation does. It seeks to enhance the visibility of the alliances across the organisation, and through that getting wider buy-in in terms of the benefits of the alliance, and therefore a greater commitment to those alliances. And it also seeks to monitor the performance of both the alliances themselves and the value that's being captured by the firm. The research suggests that putting in place such a dedicated alliance function increases the success rate of alliances from 40% to 70%. So a crucial lesson to organisations developing alliances. Here's David Angulo again, talking about how Aviva managed its portfolio of alliances and the alliance function it put in place.
So first of all, I built up a team of people who were bank assurance specialists that we could deploy in different markets. Not at the top level, but at the medium level and at the low level. Okay, it was a team of 6 people, very highly specialized and very highly experienced people who were deployed for 1 month or 2 months in that country. Okay, then another thing on which it was absolutely key, it was the processes. I was sending teams who were analyzing the banking process for selling insurance. And then we were doing a rethinking, rebuilding the way the processes were running. Because as I told you, another very important thing was seamless of the process. Okay, and that was absolutely key. And finally, having a very clear number of KPIs that were shared everywhere. Yeah. So that was very key, David. We were measuring the same things in the same way everywhere. And we were sharing that with all the countries, with all the CEOs of the countries, from our central view. And we were telling you, look, the way we recommend you to do this, this, and that is this way. Yeah. Giving benchmarking, because another thing which is key is not only external benchmark, but internal benchmark. Yeah. So why the penetration in Bank A in France was much higher than the similar product in Bank C in France. Yeah. And also, what if this process that it was built local with our global expertise could be rolled out into other markets? And that was, the point on which, we were becoming a very important bank insurance group. And regarding that, one of the things that I believe, we made very well is we wrote the Aviva White Book for bank insurance. Okay, and it was a kind of the Bible. Okay, the way we do business in Aviva Bank Insurance. I mean, it was not strict, so it didn't mean that everyone has to do everything the same, but that gave you the guidelines, and that gave you what were the key success factors that you will need to measure, and you will need to implement, and you will need to follow up in order to be a successful model.
There, David Angulo, finishing up, talking about what Kale and Singh identify as the final component of a firm-level alliance capability. That is, processes to learn and accumulate knowledge. And clearly this links back to that area of sensing and learning that Thies and Bazzano say are crucial dynamic capabilities, effectively generating and exploiting know-how, being central to gaining resource advantages. Now, in terms of alliance, there are 3 areas of alliance learning. There's firstly, and obviously, generating knowledge within the partnership. So the partnership, whether it's the joint venture, generates knowledge and then exploits that knowledge to gain advantage and success in the marketplace. Secondly, through that alliance function, the firm gains know-how about how to manage alliances. And then finally, how is the firm gaining knowledge from the partner? After all, that gaining of knowledge is often one of the objectives in setting up the alliance in the first place. Now, if we look at the routines that are put in place in each of these areas. Well, firstly, in terms of learning in the alliance, we need to see this in exactly the same way you would see a standalone firm. So the approaches to enhancing learning and exploiting learning explored in the dynamic capability selection chunk apply here. For that second area, in terms of learning how to do alliances, Kale and Singh point out how successful firms put in place processes and routines to firstly capture individual alliance know-how, what we learned from putting in place and managing each of our alliances. They then look to put in place routines to codify that know-how. So putting it into guidelines and manuals that guide future alliance activities. You also create communities of individuals involved in the alliance. So forums where individuals and groups can share their learning and then work on internalising that know-how, perhaps through hands-on apprenticeship or simulations. So individuals don't just know theoretically the approach to take, have first-hand experience on how it might play out in the real world. Finally, turning to how the firm is gaining learning from the alliance. And this depends on how the firm is establishing specific approaches to increase its absorptive capacity. And levers for this include, well, the top management commitment to that learning and clarity of the purpose of the alliance, that involves staff are very clear on the context and the objective of the alliance, so they know what to prioritise and what to avoid. And finally, formal collection and dissemination structures. So putting in place so-called clearinghouse roles that gather information and know-how from the people involved in the alliance and then disseminate it across the rest of the organisation. That absorptive capacity is crucial. If the purpose of the alliance is for each partner to gain specific know-how, and there's the risk that if one partner achieves its objective, it may look to exit the alliance, or at least reduce the risk of giving away too much. So the power balance changes in the alliance, and the danger of opportunism arises. This notion of learning races raises a deeper, more fundamental question about alliances, how firms behave within them, and even about the nature of competitive advantage in today's world. The question is whether ultimately it's competition or is it collaboration that is the dominant driver of success. So, does a firm's success result on its ability to compete or from its ability to collaborate? One paradigm would suggest, well, the organisation is a discrete, separate entity within its own boundaries, pursuing its aims and in competition with others. The other view would suggest that the organisation is deeply embedded in a socially complex ecosystem and only really succeeds through collaboration with that network in the ecosystem. So which of those drives success, and what should be the firm's approach to alliances? Now that's the question we'll pick up in the next video. But to summarise what we've seen in this lecture chunk, this video has shown that the dynamic capabilities view of competitive advantage suggests that proactively putting in place specific routines and processes to create and manage alliances is crucial to success. Formal routines are needed both in managing a single alliance, but also in creating a multi-partner alliance capability. And that capability has to include the creation and management of knowledge, both in terms of that know-how, creating an alliance, but also in realising the aims of the firm's involvement in alliances. After all, gaining knowledge is often one of the reasons that alliances are set up in the first place. However, there are questions about what should be the firm's approach to alliance. Is success driven by competition or by collaboration? And in today's world, can the firm succeed as a standalone entity, or is it increasingly reliant on others in a network? And that is the topic we'll look at in the last of the videos on collaborative strategy. Thank you for watching.